No, absolutely. Mornings around here are majestic in the
Oh,
Midwest, especially
yeah.
on 20-degree days.
Yeah. Beautiful,
Mm,
especially when it goes from 75 to 20 in like an hour. That was cool.
yeah, yeah, it was definitely cool. That's for sure. I would even say cold,
Oh,
maybe.
snap. That's cold, fool. All
See, I
right.
got the jokes. You got the singing. I got the jokes. So
Hmm.
together, we're a comedy music duo.
Wow. Just like Weird Al, except he's only one person.
Yeah, he's one person, but if you split him in half, he would be two people. So
Yeah.
we're like Weird Al if he was split in half. That's what we are. Welcome to the Accelerativ Thrust. My name is Dan,
And I'm Eric.
and we are disintegrating in thin air
Yeah.
as we speak. Yeah, I don't do sound effects. I usually don't. Just like
Wow.
I cannot for the life of me figure out how people do imitations of other people.
Oh.
Like
Hmm.
seriously, like every imitation that I've tried
Yeah.
just ends up sounding like, yeah, I heard Robert Smith from The Cure talking the other day about Friday I'm in Love, and this is what he said. Yeah, I wrote Friday I'm in Love. You know what I mean? Like, I remember I was leaving. Our friend Tim, I was leaving for a long time. I would leave messages on his voicemail, and every single time I would say I was like a different celebrity.
Oh,
Like I'd be
yeah.
like, "Yeah, this is Steve Albini. I was just calling to see if you wanted to hang out with my friend Dan Orr tonight. I can't hang out because I'm busy recording the new Jesus Lizard, something like that."
Yeah.
And
And then, did he believe it?
well, he would be like, it's weird. All of my musical heroes are calling me, and they all have the same Southern voice. I never would have guessed, and that's seriously how I would do it.
Nice.
Yeah, this is Robert Smith from The Cure. I'm glad you're my friend. Or well, not my friend, Dan's friend. I'm just glad you really like my music and Paul Westerberg's music too.
Yeah.
I
Because
don't.
that,
I don't know where I'm going this morning, Eric. I'm sorry. This is
that doesn't matter to me. I'm just here for the ride. You know.
you gotta be. This is
You
it's
gotta
a
be
pretty smooth
bold.
ride.
You gotta
Absolutely.
be wiser.
Did any news catch your eyes recently or
Well,
anything?
as far as the actual news, oof, I don't know. Did you see anything?
Yeah, I saw something that was kind of interesting.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so the story is Nurgle, who is from the band Behemoth. You know the band Behemoth?
I've heard of the
The
band Behemoth. Yeah.
they're a black metal band. I'm not familiar with them in any way
Mhm.
whatsoever, other than just their name. And anyway, he said that you should not. His advice to young musicians is an artist: do not start a band.
Hmm.
There's too many bands out there right now. Do you really want to contribute to a culture that's just not going to listen to your music and it's going to be lost in the realm of blah blah blah? But then his advice was get a proper job, go to college, get an education.
Boomer tape.
Basically he was
Yeah.
saying stuff that like our parents were telling us,
Yeah.
at age 18 or whatever.
Well,
And
yeah.
I don't know. It's it's interesting hearing that come from like a black metal singer, like um vocalist or whatever. And
Mhm.
I don't know. I can see his point to a certain extent, but I can't help also like sort of like picturing some old guy pointing his finger at like the young kids or something
Yeah.
like you don't want to get into this lifestyle. It's kind of like, what it reminded me of? It reminded me of like,
Hmm.
I know I've referenced this movie before, Young Guns.
Yes.
Um, Young Guns 2. Emilio Estevez played Billy the Kid, and there was a a younger kid who was aspiring to be just like Billy the Kid. In other words, a mass murderer. And
Nice.
an asshole as he was portrayed in the movie. He like showed him like this gunshot that he had, and he's all like, "You want this? You want this life? You know, every single time you go outside, there's people, pulling the triggers and coming after you. Is that what you want?" That was stuff. That's kind of what this sounds like to me. What do you think?
I don't disagree. I mean, I got to be honest. Here's the thing: is I think I just read through the article real fast. It feels like to me like someone who doesn't really even understand how things work currently, and basically is saying, don't get into the same game I got into, but that game doesn't exist anymore. And everyone making music knows that. Like, he's basically saying, don't start a band if you think you're going to sell records and go on tour and live off of it, which I totally agree with. But new artists aren't thinking that way anyway. They know that this isn't going to be their livelihood. I mean, anyone going into making music right now that is thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna be one of the ones that this is the rest of my life, and this is how I live and earn money and make a living and all that." No one's thinking that way anymore anyway. So I don't know. It just seems kind of like an old guy getting mad about things that don't actually even exist anymore. So
Okay, yeah, and I never looked at it through that set of eyes. That's actually a very well thought out response for having just read the article, Eric. That's
just how it came out.
I mean,
that's my hot take.
I mean, seriously though, that's because that makes sense. He isn't saying don't start a band and don't upload to Bandcamp or something, but what he's saying is don't. And I guess this is for me. I probably didn't actually read the article in full. Well, no, there's no probably about it. I pretty much just like read the headline and I kind of skimmed through it, but I guess I missed that part where he was talking about, do you really think that you're going to make money doing this? Because at this point, and really it's kind of always been that way anyway, if you really kind of look at the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
Because even in the 80s, it was all about, well, we're going to try and get a deal. We're going to try and get signed. And it was only a 1 in a million chance that you were going to do that anyway. So even then, it was just a different set of rules, a different method. Most bands were not making money off of their music even back then.
And I think that personally, I think it's really liberating for new artists and people making music. Now it's like, honestly, this is going to sound so stupid, but I mean, you were there too in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. You really did. That was part of your trajectory, that you would make a demo and send it somewhere and try to get signed onto a record label. And then they would pay for your recording. And then you would have an album out, and then you would go on tour to support it. Like, saying that out loud makes me feel like really stupid.
Very stupid.
For thinking that could have happened. But that's how everyone thought. Every local small band, whatever, people getting started, that was the plan. And it was like, if you didn't do that, then you weren't going to be successful. And what was the point, sort of? But now, everyone knows they're not going to get signed. And so they're actually, a lot of people are creating music because they want to do it, So in response to the Behemoth guy from the band Behemoth, I don't know how big he actually is. I would say to everyone to start a band, because what do you have to lose? It doesn't cost anything. I mean, not really. To get a Bandcamp page, you can use a Walkman to record everything. Who cares? You don't have to live up to anything. I think it's an amazing time to make music, personally.
I couldn't agree more. And also, I think that honestly, where we are right now, we have independent punk labels such as Discord Records to thank for this. Now, some people would say, "Oh, well, you can thank Discord Records for the way the I guess quote unquote music industry is today, and nobody's making money." But when you really think about it, though, Discord Records, and that's just, I mean, there's Alternative Tentacles, there's Amphetamine Reptile, Ipecac, there's all kinds of labels that you could point to, SST, whatever. They were kind of like the sort of in a weird sort of way, they were kind of like the 80s, 90s versions of like Bandcamp before there was like digital streaming. Like you see what I'm saying?
I can see the comparison. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of, I mean, but Discord just ended up selling a lot of records kind of by default, I think, or what, or even Alternative Tentacles, because the bands that were the flagship bands, whether it's Minor Threat or the Dead Kennedys or Black Flag, ended up becoming legacy bands that ended up being a huge influence on the next generation.
Yeah.
And so I think we're kind of keeping that sort of thing alive, because I think there's a lot of things that become very influential to the next generation that kind of started with maybe just somebody who was just recording their stuff in the bedroom and putting stuff online, like before Spotify and before Bandcamp was really a thing. You had artists putting like digital albums out on like their own websites, things like that. And so I think kind of Discord and just DIY labels in general, I think have a lot to do with why it's even possible for us to release music the way we are.
And I think it's kind of cool too, because this is something I've thought about just a little. So I'll try to put it into words. I also think those small labels, they're kind of like a time bomb, if that makes any sense.
Black coat, white shoes, black hat,
time
Cadillac,
bomb.
Yeah. The boy's a time bomb. Yeah, anyway. Sorry.
But it's like it influences a small group of people at first, and then it just kind of grows exponentially. And it's funny because the things that were coming out at a certain point might be the main influence on music in like 20, 30 years, because that's when it finally makes it to everyone, I guess I'm thinking of SST to an extent, like ultimately every punk in the world has a black flag tattoo, right? But for a while it was pretty condensed, and it took a long time to get that far. But
right.
I also think of like digital hardcore. Like, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's because it's all I have in my mind to compare things to, but the reach of digital hardcore, the label seems to just be growing more and more. And I hear more and more music that in one way or another owes kind of its whole deal to those records, but I think it's because it took a long time for it to reach everyone. And I think that's kind of cool. Kind of a cool byproduct of the small independent labels. I don't know.
Sure. And I also think that another thing that has happened that is making those types of records and those types of artists, for example, Kill Alters is who we just reviewed, is somebody who comes to mind. It's now more possible than ever, and actually almost a necessity in a lot of ways for people to use digital instruments as opposed to analog instruments, especially if you're like recording music just from your bedroom. And so like bands like, I don't know, Big Black comes to mind, for instance. I feel we're kind of ahead of their time with the use of the drum machine, because now it's like a bunch of projects or whatever you want to call them are forming where they're using drum machines and, guitars and plugging them straight into the computers to record them. So it literally is like this digital hardcore, not only the sound, but the experience,
Right.
And so I think kind of like the acceptance of synthesizers and drum machines, because I mean, in the 80s, I was too young to realize this, but in the 80s and 90s especially, I do remember this in the 90s, it was kind of frowned upon whenever there were synthesizers or drum machines. We always talked about the pulsars and how nobody really caught on to the pulsars because of their use of drum machines and synthesizers and stuff,
Yeah.
And that, I think that was because in the 90s it was frowned upon. It was supposed to be more quote unquote organic, and
Right.
drum machines and synthesizers were kind of thought of as like cold and inhuman. And now I think there's sort of a combination thing going on where people are embracing sort of like the new wave mechanical robotic sounds of the 80s and kind of mixing it with the organic, if you want to call it that. That's really for lack of a better term, but organic alternative full band rock sounds of the 90s or something,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think, especially in the 90s, like it was all about like authenticity, it was like, I don't know, like we climbed out of the dirt with this guitar on our back and we're just going to write about our feelings and stuff because that's real. And all, everything else is like Culture Club or Cyndi Lauper, I think that's how they thought anything with the synthesizer. And so, it was like Neil Young, even though he loved synthesizer, I think that he became sort of, a blueprint for how to be a grunge or whatever.
Sure.
And that didn't include big drum machines and synths and stuff. So just a kind of a blueprint. But yeah, I think that it was just seen as inauthentic. It was like the same as wearing eyeliner. It was just like that was gone. And then here's the new dirt sound.
But then something else was going on in the 90s which was like the industrial scene, which was like,
for sure,
9 Inch Nails. And then of course, Marilyn Manson, where the eyeliner suddenly became trendy again.
Yeah.
And now,
and the synths
and it all, it always happens full circle. Like, I kind of wonder if like there's going to be a time in the future where everyone's going to revert back to like the basic like guitar, bass, drums, singing about feelings. You know what I mean? I wonder if there's ever like there's even like a possibility for that to ever happen. Not that I'm hoping for it, because I want everything to exist,
I think it's going to be hard for it to happen on an all-encompassing level like grunge did. Like I still think guitar-based rock music is huge. I mean, Rock 108
Absolutely.
never runs out of songs to play. So
but
for better
Rock 108.
worse.
Well, Rock 108 plays classic rock though, so for the most part. So it's like, as far as like if you're talking about radio rock is still stuck pretty much no later than the 90s.
Yeah, true.
Radio rock is, you can see it on the festivals. I think we talked about this. Who are the biggest headliners? They're bands that have, I don't know, Dinosaur Jr. It's weird to call somebody like Dinosaur Jr. classic rock, but let's be real. Or, I don't know, even like AC/DC is still headlining rock festivals, But then you look at rap festivals and it's, the headliners are actually like current,
Yeah.
And in fact, with rap, it's the opposite. You're going to have the headliner be somebody like, I don't know, who's the most current, like, I don't know, we'll just say like, I can't think of anybody off the
Houdini.
Houdini. The freaks come out at night.
That's as modern as rap gets.
That's It never went beyond that.
Nope, it didn't.
No, I was gonna say, I don't know, just off the bat,
Right.
thinking like Lil Uzi Vert or something, which, and maybe that's even dated at this point. But like that's just slip off the mind. But then you're gonna have somebody like that be the headliner, but then you're gonna have like Wu-Tang Clan kind of be like the support on those festivals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unless like Wu-Tang Clan gets back together to perform like 36 chambers in its entirety, then maybe they'll do something like that. Or wouldn't it be cool if the Gravediggers got back together to play 6 Feet Deep in full?
That would be cool. I would want to go see that.
It would be interesting for sure.
So I'll take your line. So Gravediggers, if you're listening,
yes,
go ahead and do that, and I'll pay $40. So you could earn up to $40 if you do
it. you're giving RZA and Prince Paul financial advice.
Yeah. Hey, you want to make $40?
Who else was in that group? It was RZA, Prince Paul, and who were the other? There's like 2 other members, right?
I don't know who the real people are.
Okay.
Like I only know their Gravedigger names, you know.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I know RZA and Prince Paul were both in it. Like RZA.
Yeah, but he wasn't Prince Paul in Gravedigger.
Yeah,
I mean, that wasn't his name.
They had like horrorcore names, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, gotcha. Like Violent J and
no, their names
Shaggy
were
Two Dope.
Violent J. It was Prince Paul as the Undertaker, Fru Quan as the Gatekeeper, 2 Poetic is the Grim Reaper, and the Resurrector is RZA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So the only 2 like really big names are Prince Paul and RZA. I don't know who the other 2 guys are. Maybe I'm missing something.
I don't know them. I don't know 2 Poetic.
Yeah,
but,
no,
I love the Gravediggers.
Yeah, no, you've mentioned this, and I haven't delved into that record enough, so I'm gonna have to do that because I do like I've always been intrigued by that album cover. I remember I would always see it at Musicland, and it made me laugh. It was just like Gravediggers, you know what I mean, sort of thing. Like,
yeah.
And I always
check
thought
out
about
the 3rd record. I've never heard it.
They have a 3rd record?
Yeah, I just saw it.
Huh. Interesting. I know they had a 2nd record, but
they might have 4 records. Holy crap!
they keep releasing records.
Great. As I look at it on Spotify, well, fuck. Now they have 5 records.
5 records.
Oh
wow.
man, 6. It looks like.
Wow, they just keep adding them. It'd be funny if they're just adding them as you're looking at them. Like today, they just decided they're gonna add like 20 records.
As long as I don't scroll up on the screen, they don't release any more albums.
Well, listeners, if you want to go down a Gravediggers rabbit hole, or Eric is your guide,
or Grave Hole.
Grave Hole. There we go.
Or Wormhole. Morbid.
Speaking of Gravediggers records, wouldn't that be a perfect segue into us talking about some records again?
I mean, perfect. It's a good word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any other word to describe it.
Oh man, we didn't goof off very much during that bullshittery at the beginning.
No, it was
all very serious.
It was very serious.
This is how I feel about grunge. This is how I feel about modern music.
So yeah, that's true. Yeah, we didn't goof off. And it's maybe next time we should talk about something that makes us both very, very angry, and we could start screaming. Not at each other, but just screaming, into the.
We should just start getting into fights at the beginning of the episode.
What the hell are you saying about me?
I'll just take some asinine position on something, and then you'd have to defend it, and then we would fight.
I think it would be funny.
Oh, you know what we should have talked about? Did you watch the Weird Al movie?
I have not. I want to see it though. I heard that it's I heard it's basically kind of like a parody of his actual life, which is genius.
It is,
because that's exactly what Weird Al is a parody artist. And I heard that it's like a parody of like it basically like paints Weird Al as kind of being like this over excessive sort of rock, typical like rock star.
It's
sort
very, very funny. So you should watch it, and we'll talk about it next time.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I will. What's it available on? Is it on?
It's on Roku TV, which I didn't have, but it doesn't cost anything. So
awesome. No, I've got a Roku, so that means I can watch it. So
Roku.
Hell yeah, Roku. Now that sounds like a rap name too.
Roku. What's
Check
that now?
While the DJ revolves it.
Are you going to talk about fucking Ninja Turtles again?
No, that was Vanilla
I can see
Ice,
where this is going, Dan.
Basically the same thing, but now that
your tricks.
Now that you mention it,
go Ninja, go!
Mm-hmm. Oh man!
All right, we got to the stupid level we needed to be at.
There we go. Yeah,
I got a stupometer on my desktop
here. Dude, that sounds. Oh man, we got to talk about some marketing ideas and stuff when we're off the air.
You mean after the show is over and we're not doing it anymore?
Exactly.
Yeah. Post-mortem.
Post-mortem.
Or post-boredom, if you're talking about our show. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that's over.
Yeah. Anyway.
Let's get into the record, shall we?
Come on, everybody. It's record time.
All right. So my pick for this episode is by a group called Die Monitr Batts. I'll just spell that because it's not spelled right. D.i.y. Monitr Batts. Okay. The album's called Youth Controllers with 2 Z's at the end. This came out in 2003. So it's kind of an older record, but when I heard it, I was like, if this came out now, I would still find it just as, I don't know, interesting and shocking in its own way, and just very modern feeling. So even though it is older, I really don't feel like it's aged that much. But so yeah, Die Monitr Batts. It's hard to explain. It's really rhythm driven. The drums are really out front. Think something like ESG, maybe, as far as like the sound of the drums. They are somewhat funky like ESG, but also straight in their own way. It's hard stuff to explain, but I'll try. It's super raw, intense. I think it feels very wild. Basically, the makeup of this band, like I said, is really drums in the forefront, a really wild saxophone doing most of the melodic elements of it. There are guitar and drums, but I feel like they are more like creating a background of chaos, or more like supporting the chaos. Because the drums and saxophones are pretty rigid. It reminded me a lot of John Zorn, the earlier John Zorn stuff. Especially, I don't remember what album it's on, but the song Disco Volante, not the Bungle record, but the John Zorn song. It just really early on John Zorn kind of stuff. But then there's like a shouted vocal, like in unison, kind of the shouty type, I don't know, like Atari Teenage Riot vocals maybe. I think there's at least 2 singers going most of the time. The songs are nonsensical in their own way, and because of that, they're kind of goofy in their own way, or funny, but it's also presented so straight that it seems sort of serious. It's not ironic. It's just strange, if that makes any sense. Yeah, the vocals, like I said, are just shouted, and they seem to be, basically about some really nonsensical situations. It's very smart and jazzy, even though it's kind of lazy in its own way, and it's also kind of like just obstinate in its own way, and like its attitude. It's very in your face. And I feel like I'm dancing around what this actually sounds like, but I can't quite get there without just saying things that it reminds me of. So, like I said, John Zorn. It reminds me a lot of Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. The Dog-Faced Hermans, which is a 90s band that was on Alternative Tentacles. Really big sax in the forefront. Too Many Zoos would be sort of a more modern thing that kind of sounds like this. And actually, it reminded me a lot of a band here in Iowa City that existed for a while called Cone Trauma, at least as far as how the vocals are delivered. But yeah, it is. I find it hard to pinpoint exactly what this sounds like. Maybe Dan will have some ideas about that. But honestly, it's just really rhythmic. Reminds me of kind of no wave stuff, but also just has this really intense avant-garde element to it that isn't about art. It's more about being disorienting in its own way. Yeah, but it does have a really, I think Youth Controllers is a pretty good title for it. It does have an energetic, youthful feel to it. It feels like something that is very urgent and needs to be said and get out there. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I really have to say about it. So maybe Dan has some more words. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah. Now I heard this album about the time it came out in 2003, Die Monitr Batts, Youth Controllers. Now, for me, and I think a lot of what you had to say about it was definitely accurate, Eric, but there was a scene of this kind of stuff that was happening. First of all, I don't know if you caught this or not, Eric, but this band actually, do you know the band The Gossip?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, so The Gossip were this band that were kind of making waves like around the same time. And they were kind of like this sort of dancey, for lack of this is a very simplistic way of describing, but dancey punk. This band actually features at least one member of The Gossip.
Okay.
So it, at the time that this came out in 2003, there was a lot of this kind of, I don't know, like as you kind of put it, Eric, disorienting, sort of chaotic, sort of noisy, but discordant, and with like start, stop, crazy staccato rhythms, dancey, like sort of beats. And then just these sort of like weird shouted vocals. There was kind of a lot of this stuff going on at the time. And each band that kind of did this, I feel really sort of did their own take on it, including Die Monitr Batts. And so it's, to me, this is just like really chaotic, noisy, sort of dancey, hardcore. I know that's a lot of words to be thrown around, but that is heavily influenced by like no wave and maybe some stuff like, I don't know how you would even describe necessarily the music that shellac makes, but like kind of like some of the start stop rhythms and sort of like dwellings on like one note kind of reminds me of shellac at times. And then also like the sort of crazy, I guess, I don't know, this is a really dumb word, but it's the only thing that kind of comes to mind, zaniness of something like Six Finger Satellite.
Yeah, totally.
You know, or something like that. And it's, this kind of stuff existed. Like a lot of it kind of was a moment in time for me that really challenged the idea of what hardcore and punk could be, and what it was. And so it was very these sort of like sassy hardcore bands that were kind of doing this kind of thing. What I really like about this in particular is I love the way how it sounds like just completely, and I know I've described a lot of records like this, but totally controlled yet out of controlled chaos. Like it'll kind of like the songs oftentimes like will have this like really just again start stop rhythm. I don't know. I'm having a hard time kind of getting it out. But then like you said, the saxophone, which is very like rigid sounding, and then the songs by the time it gets to like the middle of the songs, which is usually like not very long because the songs are very short on this, by the way. It kind of like falls apart, but it sounds like it falls apart in a controlled way. Like it sounds like they're kind of like purposely like writing these songs as if they're supposed to be like sort of, and I don't want this to come off in any insulting way, but almost like they were written by like people who are just learning the instruments, kind of like in a weird sort of way, like towards the end of the song, like. And it's just, I don't know. It's always something that has fascinated me about that kind of seemed to be sort of a thing that was happening. And as far as like the timelessness of this kind of stuff, I couldn't agree with you more, Eric, that it really, they were ahead of their time, I think. And I think we were talking about the influence of like electronic music on a lot of today's music. I think that this was also an influence on a lot of today's kind of more, I guess, experimental music, especially like some of the stuff that's coming out of hardcore nowadays.
Yeah.
And hardcore is kind of like, it's not even really like, this isn't really a hardcore record. It's just kind of like a mixture of a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
That is just really, I think it's just kind of trying to challenge the listener a lot of the times. And I would say that a lot of the kindred spirits that I hear with stuff like this, that these were kind of all bands that were sort of happening around the same time, like X Models, the Chinese Stars, which had a member of Six Finger Satellite, by the way, a band called the Silver Daggers, especially because the Silver Daggers had a saxophone in it. Double Dagger, USA is a Monster, the Blood Brothers. I would say early Liars. Yeah. I know you're familiar with the Liars, Eric. Erebon Radar was another one that kind of, I mean, Lightning Bolt, Hella, and then also Sweep the Leg Johnny. Yeah, so that, you know, some of these, and I hate to kind of compare, but I think that if somebody like listens to this and this is kind of like their first exposure to like this kind of stuff, the reason why I rattled off so many comparisons is because I think if you like this and you haven't heard anything like it, you're going to love all the other bands too that I just mentioned.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's kind of how I view it. But I do think that this is definitely ahead of its time, and that if it was released today, it would sound, I mean, seriously, it wouldn't sound dated in any way whatsoever.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
I think that this is definitely it's definitely a great, challenging sort of hardcore record or punk record or whatever it is. And a lot of these bands, or all these bands that I just mentioned, I feel were doing kind of the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
so,
I can see that.
Cool. But yeah, awesome stuff. Okay, so the record that I picked for this episode is from a band called the Interrupters, and the name of the record is In the Wild. This just came out this year, about 2 months ago, I believe. And the Interrupters are a band from LA who are largely known or labeled as a ska band for the most part, which I don't think is entirely accurate, which I'll get to here in a minute. But they consist of vocalist Amy Interrupter and then 3 brothers, I believe, Jesse, Justin, and Kevin Bavona. And I'm just going to say it right off the bat. I love this record. I listened to it pretty close to the first day it came out. I've known of the Interrupters for a while because they're on Hellcat Records, which is Tim Armstrong from Rancid's label. And they've had a couple of radio hits that I've kind of always enjoyed. But I decided to give this one a listen. And honestly, I haven't really stopped listening to this record since I first heard it. It's really basically the way I would describe it. It's just really, really good, like punk rock, like catchy punk tunes with a lot of new wave, a lot of ska, like a lot of ska. Like, I mean, that it definitely is not, there's no shortage of ska on this record or ska influences. And then I would also say some reggae influences and things like that. Amy's voice is very powerful. The thing that I really like about it also is that the players, the Bavona brothers, are just really masterful musicians, I think. And I just think that they write such, amazing songs, in my opinion. And then the other thing that I really like about this record is that the lyrics really seem to be sort of about letting go of past mistakes and going on a new path. So there really seems to be kind of like a self-healing sort of vibe to it, which is, I think, is really inspiring. I kind of feel like more so on this record than any of the other Interrupters records, which I've only really listened to one other record, I believe, and not in near as much as this one. I kind of feel like you're kind of hearing Amy Interrupter's story through her lyrics. So there's kind of like almost like a storytelling aspect. She's kind of letting out a lot of personal demons and allows some vulnerabilities to come out. And I think that kind of vulnerability or expression it's kind of rare on a record that is generally this catchy. Like I don't know. And again, that's just my opinion. I'd be interested in hearing your take on that, Eric, if you kind of have one about that. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's like I said, I don't really think labeling them just a ska band, I think you're kind of doing them a disservice. There's really just a lot of like really good, I guess, like for lack of a better way to describe it, pop punk. But I don't really want to say that either because that has certain connotations. I do definitely think that they kind of wear some of their new wave influences on their sleeve. Everything from the album cover, which almost has like a new wave vibe to it. Some of the songs have like organ and piano in such a way that almost reminds me of something like, "Hey Mickey, you're so fine, you're so fine." I can't think of the name of the. Who is it that did that song? Do you know?
Who sang Mickey? Tony Basil.
Tony Basil, that's it. Yeah. And that's not saying that none of this really sounds like that, but kind of does have that vibe from time to time. Also, I mean, there's definitely a love of ska and reggae, especially. I mean, Tim Armstrong is a guest on a song called As We Live, which also includes Rhoda Dakar. I could be saying that completely wrong, or Rhoda Dakar or something like that. And there's like 3 or 4 really strong ska reggae influenced songs. But overall, what I think really is the star of the show here is Amy's voice. It's kind of hard for me to put into words here, like exactly how to describe this. And this might be kind of a weird, this might sound kind of weird for like music that is like this, but she totally makes it work. To me, it almost sounds like a cross between there's a little bit of like a Gwen Stefani thing from like No Doubt. But I say that if like Courtney Love sang for like kind of like sang for Rancid or something, then I think you kind of got, at least in my mind, you're pretty close to what's happening here. But overall, I think, there's horns, there's organ, there's keys, there's a couple of really great ballads on here too, like especially the closer Alien, where again, I think that there's a lot of relatable stuff, a lot of relatable content in the lyrics. But I think overall, if you like Rancid, I mean, I think that kind of goes without saying. And I mean, that's sort of, a go-to and that's not just because they're on Hellcat, but I do honestly think that there is, definitely that would appeal. And also Operation Ivy, but also like No Doubt, The Specials, Bad Cop, who we reviewed earlier on the show. And then also I would say like, only because her voice does remind me of Courtney Love sometimes. Hole, although I wouldn't say that they sound like Hole, but there is definitely like that sort of thing. But I also think that Amy, I'm also going to say, she definitely doesn't sound like Courtney Love. There's just kind of echoes of that sort of in there. And I would say maybe even a little bit of Blondie or something like that is kind of going on here. Yeah, I think it's a good combination of everything. And overall, I just think it's great songs and a great album. And what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I liked it. I have not listened to the Interrupters before at all, and so I didn't really know what to expect. And I was kind of surprised at how polished it is. I mean, I'm not surprised on their part. I guess I'm more surprised on your pick. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just put it on.
Sure.
Like, oh shit, this is a real album. Because we cover a lot of stuff that isn't created like this. This right. is coming from a whole different motivation. There's a whole different reason for this being made. It feels like than a lot of the stuff we review, and that's awesome because I don't think we're stuck in ruts or anything like that, but I think it's a lot of times things being sort of lo-fi or weird or avant-garde or aggressive or whatever, like a lot of our picks include those elements, and that is just the way it is because I think that's what we like and everything. But it was cool to have a pick that was like, oh shit, okay, let's approach this like a real album. You know what I mean? I know that sounds weird, but so it's very, in my opinion, very poppy, very polished. And at its core, I do think ska punk is not a bad thing to call it by any means. I think that could encompass most of the things that come up. But, like you said, there are elements of straight pop punk, and I don't have another word for it. So if the connotation is bad, then I don't know what to say. But
yeah, same here.
Pop punk, dub, straight sort of reggae, rock steady. It incorporates a lot of stuff from trad ska to like second wave to even like third wave ska punk stuff, and it's all done really well. But yeah, you can tell this is, even though I've never listened to the Interrupters, and honestly probably have heard the name but never come into contact with them, so you could tell it was an established group even if you had never heard it before, like just by listening, because it's beyond confident. It's like every note is perfect. Every sound they wanted to create, they created exactly the way they wanted. The arrangements of the songs are like really plotted out and thought about, and this is going to sound weird, but it was kind of like listening to a Def Leppard record, like those Bob Rock records where every note basically was recorded on its own and everything is perfect, and I know Def Leppard, whatever, you can laugh at them or whatever, I get it, but those records like Pyromania or whatever, like they are feats of production. They're amazing. And it sort of reminded me of that. Like it's very thought out and executed just as well as anything probably that I've ever heard. So in that sense, like it's beyond clean and it's beyond pointed and specific. Like it's just exactly what it's supposed to be. I loved all the guest spots. Like you said, Tim Armstrong, there were a bunch of other people. And I think the reason I like the guest spots is because the songs almost became a little more tailored to fit the guest, if that makes any sense. And so in some of the tracks, you might have like some kind of I don't know, like a rock steady toaster come on, and so it has more of that feel to it or whatever. Or like the song Tim Armstrong's on, it's a little more rancidy, if for lack of a better term, even though that's not really a term. Anyway, so I think that's cool. When they brought new people in, it kind of affected the music, and I think that's how it should be. Like, if you're going to bring someone in, you're bringing them in for a reason, right? It still is totally cohesive, though, of course, even if they strike out on some different kind of modes or thoughts or songs or things like that. It's still the same group, and it's still presented in that cohesive sort of way. Perfect performances on everything, on all fronts: the guitar, bass, drums, the horns, the synths and organs, definitely bringing up sort of that more like two-tone element, like you were saying with the specials. And yeah, the vocals are great. I'll get back to the vocals, I guess. But yeah, lyrically, I think you're right. I think it's sort of like an empowerment sort of record. It's like it is looking back in its own way, but it's also looking forward as a response to the past, and I think that's really cool. But yeah, I think as far as musical elements and things I would compare it to, Rancid, I think honestly the boss tones, and hear me out for just a second, as far as the production goes, and the production of like the Let's Face It era. I don't know if anyone's really familiar with that record. It's probably one of my favorite Boss Tones ones, but it is also production wise very similar to this. Lyrically, it sort of reminded me of that Jim Lindberg record we reviewed, but instead of just looking back on the past and sort of not really missing any of it or regrets or anything, but just talking about what came before, it was similar to that. But like I said, it was upbeat. It also had this forward-looking element to it too, which is really cool. I also had specials and Madness, especially with the piano parts that you were talking about. Like Madness was I think one of the few bands that really incorporated the piano a lot, and made it awesome. As far as vocally, I had Kim Shattuck from the Muffs, which I think is, and people are going to hate on me for this, but I do think that at its core, you could either cite her or Courtney Love, and you would be at kind of the same vocal delivery style. And like I said, I know people are going to be mad about that, but it's kind of the way it is. And then also No Doubt. And not only Gwen Stefani's vocal styles or whatever, but especially the album Rocksteady, which came out quite a long time ago. But it had all the same elements that this record has. It had new wave elements. It had rocksteady dub, just ska punk. And it was, in my mind, that's as close to anything that I've heard that sounds like this record. So, and I also understand that the Interrupters probably hate that comparison, and fans of the Interrupters probably hate that comparison too. But unfortunately, that's what I have to work with in my listening experiences, So, but I think, yeah, like Dan said, if you're into any of the stuff that we mentioned and this style of music, and you just kind of want to hear some really ska-oriented, reggae-oriented, upbeat sort of pop punk stuff, then this is it. So you're going to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Boss Tones. That is spot on. That is one band that I didn't even think of. And also Kim Shattuck, definitely from the Muffs, for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't even, those slipped my mind completely, but that's totally accurate. 100%.
Well, that's why we both review things, right?
Exactly. We both have different takes that oftentimes kind of also are very similar. And I think this is one of those situations
for sure
where, we both kind of heard the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic record. And I don't want to give away, because I'm sure we're going to do another best of, like episode of 2022.
Oh yeah.
maybe we will, maybe we won't. I don't know. But anyway.
No, we should. I just have to start thinking now.
Yeah, same here. But this record is so far, I'm not going to say it is my definitive favorite yet, but it's at the top of the list. It's in my top 3 so far. I can't stop listening to this record. It also, this is so embarrassing to say that it does kind of make me feel a little nostalgic as well.
Sure.
Because as current as it is, it does kind of take me back to a time when I was sort of 15, 16 years old and listening to a lot of this kind of stuff, like the records that we referenced, And I also think that this is kind of a great, because it's not nostalgic in any way whatsoever, because it totally is modern, but it does kind of have that sort of, that sound that you can remember sort of from like 96, 97 a little bit, like you mentioned, the production on Let's Face It, very similar, so totally makes sense. But anyway, it's like I said, it's almost embarrassing to say that, but because I
think
really
so. It plays into everything we experience. You know what I mean? Like,
that's true.
Our present is filtered through our past. It's just the way it is.
Exactly. That's how it always is. So, all right, now on to the next release, which is not a very poppy record or tape, I should say. This is our local pick.
This is local?
Yes, absolutely.
And it is from this project called Chachka. And the name of this tape is Chameleon Grievances. And unless you purchase the tape from the Bandcamp, you can also listen to it on Bandcamp. But I would strongly suggest supporting Jessica, who is the person behind this project. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce her last name. I think it's Jessica Zielinski, and the D is silent, but that's a guess. And that's what I think it is, but I don't know for sure. So, Jessica, if you were listening and I got your name wrong, I apologize. I tried. Anyway, Jessica also plays bass in the band Psyop. Psyop is, of course, the band that also features Dolly, who we interviewed, who also runs Pokey's Records.
Yeah.
And Psyop is one of, well, let's see, their roster has expanded quite a bit because we reviewed 3 releases and now they're up to about 6 or 7, I think.
Yeah.
So they're getting quite the profile going. But anyway, Jessica also plays bass in Psyop. And she described it. Now, I follow her on Instagram, and she posted on her IG that she had this tape out, which was what she described as ambient psych sound collage type stuff. And that interested me right away. And I think this was before she set up a Bandcamp for this. So she just said, if anyone's interested, just PM me on Instagram. And so I did, and I PayPal'd her the money, and I actually got the tape here, but I have to admit something happened to my tape player and I have not been able to listen to it. So luckily, I found out that she created a Bandcamp for it. And so as far as the ambient psych sound collage type stuff, I mean, that's exactly how I would describe it also. There's a lot of samples, a lot of background noises that create some soundscapey stuff. Definitely some cinematic type stuff. The recording is very boxy and gritty, which I think is kind of meant to be that way. There's guitars with lots of effects. And a lot of times I'm not even sure what's actually making the sounds, which I love. I love it when I don't know what's going on. And there's also kind of like this underneath the compositions, there's always kind of like this weird staticky sound that almost sounds like an old TV with snow, and kind of trying to like you know, flip the channels to find something, a station that's actually going to come in, or kind of like switching stations on AM radio and just kind of hearing the whooshing sounds a little bit. There's some synths on here. And yeah, so basically that, I mean, I can't think of a better way to describe it than ambient psych sound collage stuff. There's some droney stuff kind of going on. A lot of it is instrumental. Well, actually, it all is instrumental as far as I can tell. I think maybe there's some use of voices in there. Maybe that's kind of what some of the sounds are that I'm hearing that I'm not sure to nail down. But it is, it's definitely for a certain type of listener, for sure. But I also think that it's really just kind of an enjoyable experience listening to this. One of the things that I think is great is all of the songs seem to be tied together. And I kind of really think, and this is why I can't wait till I can actually listen to the cassette, because I have a feeling just listening to it from the Bandcamp that it's kind of tied together as like one piece. Because I noticed that a lot of the like the endings of the tracks kind of flow into each other. And so I really do not have a lot to go off as far as comparison goes here. Maybe Eric will be able to offer a little bit more as far as that goes, but just kind of right off the bat, I'm thinking like Negative Land, a little bit of Godspeed You Black Emperor, and maybe some of the more experimental psychedelic Sid Barrett type stuff. But yeah, if you're into like samples and kind of background noises and but also I mean there's some really beautiful guitar work on here. You can definitely hear like some synths kind of going on and a bunch of kind of different instruments. And I think that Jessica makes really good use of a lot of weird sounds that I think is wonderfully weird. The last track on here is the title track, Chameleon Grievances. And it's just a really great guitar jam. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to it. Like I said, I kind of viewed it as an experience. And for me, the best way for me to listen to this was to put on the headphones. And I honestly think that if you don't listen to this, something like this with headphones, you're maybe not getting the full experience, or at least with a good, like, sound system so that you're kind of getting everything that's in there. I just kind of laid back and closed my eyes and just sort of let it go. And yeah, I thought it was really great. What did you think, Eric?
Yeah, pretty similar take from me. But yeah, like you were saying, basically, I found this to be just very immersive. Just something it's easy to fall into and stay there. It's disorienting in its own way, but it's not really aggressive. I know that a lot of times the idea of something being dissonant or disorienting implies sort of an aggressive or noisy or overwhelming aspect, and I don't think this really has that. It's very subtle and industrial in its own way, and it's mostly, it feels like just world building or just creating atmospheres and places to spend some time, contemplative places, and I think it pulls that off really well. Yeah, it is obscured and muffled. A lot of the samples, a lot of the noise, sort of noise floor type samples, what kind of makes up the atmosphere and the bass sort of level sound. A lot of those are really obscured and muffled, which adds obviously to the atmosphere of the whole thing. But there's other elements that are really sharp and clear, mostly in the rhythm or the rhythmic elements. There's a lot of, it sounds to me kind of like maybe like chimes or even sound bowls. I don't know if anyone's ever done any sort of like sound healing or been around any of that stuff, but some of those meditative instruments are in there. It sounds like to me, and it adds this sort of I don't want to say ritualistic element to it, but at least like a mindfulness element to it, where we're going through something. We're purposely focusing on being there, being present. That's how it felt to me. But yeah, parts grow out of the static, and that's a really nice thing. It's like Dan said, it flows together. It flows from beginning to end, and it does have this wave element to it for me, which is things sort of just bubbling up out of the noise, out of the static, becoming their own piece for a little while, and then going back into it's like a primordial ooze almost, if that makes any sense. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed spending time in this world that was created. And yeah, as far as music I could compare it to, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna probably take it from a more industrial viewpoint because that's what it reminded me of. So especially Nurse with Wound. That's probably the closest thing that I've heard like this. I mean, there are elements of cut up stuff like Negative Land, but the cut up elements of it weren't used to cause any sort of humorous response or ironic response or whatever, which I think is a goal of a lot of that cut up stuff. And so this didn't have that. This was more built on samples. And that's where, for me, that sort of comparison, that's where it kind of ends, is the construction element of it. So yeah, Nurse with Wound, Cabaret Voltaire, Psychic TV, rhythmically reminded me of African Head Charge. As far as like the guitars go, it brought to mind Air or Pink Floyd, which the way Air uses guitars a lot of times coincides with exactly how Pink Floyd used guitars. So those are similar comparisons. And on it, this is going to sound so stupid, but one of my favorite movie scores of all time, is from an old black and white horror movie called Carnival of Souls. And it just has this sort of like swirling organ sound through the whole thing. And for some reason, this brought that to mind too, just how everything can drop out and come back. And it just has this swirling immersive element to it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I listened to it a few times. I would say if you listen to this and like it, I would definitely check out Nurse with Wound, and I would listen to that Carnival of Souls score. Honestly, you should just listen to the Carnival of Souls anyway. But yeah, Chachka, Chameleon Grievances, I loved it. And the last track, like Dan said, I think that was the closest to sort of a tangible song, and not really song, but at least musical piece that you could grab onto. And it made for a really nice resolution for the album, because the rest of it doesn't really have that. And so, like Dan mentioned with Godspeed, it kind of had that element of it where it builds to sort of a crescendo and a really pretty piece. And that's sort of how this resolved because of that last track for me. So yeah, I loved it. I'm going to check out as much as I can of their stuff and go from there. So yeah, good pick.
Wow. So we have Instagrams, we have Facebooks.
We do.
I like how I said we have Facebooks and like we have multiple accounts.
Yeah, we have all the Facebooks,
the
whole series.
Anyway, if in all seriousness, folks, if you have anything you want to tell us, you want us to know what you want to know, have any artists you would like us to review or just talk to, or anything, or just talk about music, drop us a message through Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
And Yeah, man. To be honest with you, I'm done with my Perrier lime now.
Oh, wow. You're fancy.
Yeah, which I think that can signify the end of the show this week,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Sure.
All right.
Out of water, out of road, out of car. Don't know how I'm going to go.
Is that a Modest Mouse reference?
Yeah.
Out of gas. Oh man, I love that song.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a great couple of weeks and enjoy the cold weather, Iowa.
Yeah. Woohoo.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Ska, like a lot of ska. There's no shortage of ska.